So Heath and I, we talk about running backs. Robert Turbin played the position, so why don't we lean on his expertise and talk about some running backs and some scenarios that could be impacting your fantasy rosters and maybe some moves you can make moving forward. And let's start in Tampa Bay. So we touched on this a little bit earlier when we were talking about Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and their respective injuries and the roles that the running backs could play moving forward. And here's what these guys did in their game against Baltimore, which, as Heath alluded to, very tough matchup. So you had Rachaad White, maybe his best game ever as a pro. 10 carries, 40 yards. 6 catches, 71 yards, and 2 touchdowns on 6 targets. You had Bucky Irving, 9 carries, 23 yards, and a touchdown, and a little bit of a role in the passing game, 3 catches, 54 yards on 3 targets. Sean Tucker, 5 carries, 29 yards, and 1 catch for 9 yards on 2 targets. So, Robert, last week going into the game, when we had the three-headed monster potentially after what Tucker and Irving did against the Saints, you said Tucker was going to be the best guy moving forward, which was, a very solid take, knowing that Tucker had just done what he had accomplished, and we didn't know when Rachaad White would play. So, coming off of this game, knowing the situation now with the pass catchers, how do you view the Bucs backfield moving forward? Is it White is going to be a difference maker as a pass catcher? Is Irving going to be the guy that takes the majority of the carries? Give us the breakdown of the Bucs backfield. Are you still supporting Tucker as the best guy?
I still support Tucker, but not as the best guy. He is going to be complementary, though, to the other 2 backs. This is going to be a 50-50 split, in my opinion, with Rachaad White and Bucky Irving, with Rachaad obviously taking the lion's share of the passing game and Bucky Irving getting the carries and running in between the tackles. Sean Tucker will come in and spell these guys when needed. But I think the Buccaneers really found something in that game against the Baltimore Ravens as it pertains to how they want to utilize these running backs. Because Rachaad White really hadn't been doing much this season, and now he's got his best game, like we alluded to. And so they're going to want more of that, and they're going to put him in position to be successful in the way that he was against the Ravens, catching the football.
I still do think it's really going to be difficult for these guys to be consistent, like top 20 running backs when they're sharing like they are. Nobody had more than a 33% rush share in their most recent game. So last week I didn't want to start any of the 3 because I just didn't know who was going to touch the ball. This week, I'm viewing White and Irving now as high-end flexes, maybe a low-end RB2, but not anyone you're necessarily certain of. And Tucker is still that boom-bust flex. I think he'll probably be dropped in some leagues because people aren't happy with his touches. He's averaging 9.7 yards per touch so far this season. He still has the ability on a weekly basis to get hot on a drive and then get the ball more. I don't want to drop Sean Tucker, but I'm certainly preferring White and Bucky Irving right now.
Fascinating graphic that they showed during the game that the Bucs the last 2 years last in the NFL in rushing. This year they're 8th, at least going into the game against Baltimore. So the game against the Saints certainly helped, but they're doing a much better job with their rushing attack overall. And Rachaad White now is going to be needed in the passing game. So I think we can all say he's got the most upside given the injuries to the wide receivers there in Tampa Bay. Let's talk about Alvin Kamara, who thankfully for his sake got a 2-year contract extension, $24.5 million, and is going to stay in New Orleans for at least the next 2 seasons. But do we have a Alvin Kamara problem on our hands, Robert, at least until Derek Carr returns? Because while he did score a touchdown in Week 6 against Tampa Bay, got you 17.4 PPR points, his last 3 games have been underwhelming, under 40 yards rushing. He has done some work in the passing game, which you love to see, 5 catches each of those 3 games. But he had 6 catches for 14 yards against Denver. Is that just a bad matchup? Or is Alvin Kamara maybe slowing down a little bit? And if he has another good game, would you look to sell him, knowing that this offensive line's been a problem? Carr's already playing through 1 injury when he does return. What's your view on Alvin Kamara rest of season?
If you have Alvin Kamara and you have some depth at running back, if you look at what's going on at the wide receiver spot, injury-wise, he could be a sell guy coming off of a really good game. And the thing for Alvin Kamara is, he just doesn't have the surrounding parts anymore around him right now. So that's really derailing his performance. I don't think it has anything to do with his age or anything like that. But the team is dealt with some injuries, and it's really impacting Alvin Kamara's production. So if you need some depth at wide receiver and there's another team that needs depth at running back, there's an opportunity then to sell after a good game for Alvin Kamara.
I think that last part was the key part, because I would say after a good game, I don't really want to sell him right now when things aren't looking good. I'm not going to take a bath and sell him for an RB2 cost or something like that, because I do think when Carr's back, this offense is still going to function through Alvin Kamara. He still has a chance every single week to lead the team in targets and receptions. So he's still a must-start running back, still somebody that I'm holding on to this week unless somebody blows me away with an offer.
And you're not going to sit him against the Chargers. Chargers are number 3 in terms of fewest fantasy fantasy points allowed to running backs. But James Conner just had over 150 total yards against this defense. So Kamara is certainly capable of that. I don't know if we'll get that without Carr on the field. After that, though, Carolina week 9, they're the best matchup you can find on the table. He dominates that matchup. Then maybe you sell him because then he gets Atlanta, Cleveland, and a bye going into week 12. So wait until after week number 9, and that could be the right time to sell Alvin Kamara. All right, Rob, let's talk about the Dolphins backfield here because Tua is expected to return, and that should make everything better. Whether it makes them perfect, that's hard to expect, but certainly things will be better than what we've seen under Tyler Huntley. Devon Achane's healthy. Raheem Mostert's healthy. Jalen Wright's healthy. Are we going to see 3 guys touching the ball for the Dolphins backfield, or we go back to the 2-headed monster that we had last year? How do you view Miami's backfield with Tua healthy and looking at even this week's matchup, which seems to be somewhat favorable against the Cardinals, and hopefully they take advantage of it?
I see this backfield very similarly to Tampa Bay, the way that we talked about them. Rachaad White, Bucky Irving being like those top 2 guys, Sean Tucker being a complimentary. Same thing here. Devon Achane, Raheem Mostert, they're going to run the table and get the lion's share of opportunities in the backfield for the Miami Dolphins. And then Jalen Wright will come in and, play some supplemental and get some opportunities. Could be a huge boom guy, in some games. But I'm putting all my trust right now in Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert, no doubt about it.
I think the real question I have about this is what's Achane's true efficiency? We saw last year he was the most efficient running back in football, scored once every 10 touches, averaged 7.8 yards per attempt. This year he's at 3.7 yards per carry, and he scored twice on 100 touches. It's probably somewhere in the middle, and that's going to determine whether he's a must-start running back or if he's like Rachaad White, kind of someone who's hanging around as a low-end RB2, because I don't think he's going to see 20 touches per game. I agree with Robert in terms of how the work's going to be distributed. Hopefully Tua coming back, freeing up this passing game, helps Achane to be a little bit more efficient because he hasn't been at all so far this year.
One of the more fascinating stats I saw coming off of week number 7, the Dolphins have scored 70 points as a team this season. They scored 70 points against the Broncos in one game last year. That's how different things are without Tua there since week 2 with the concussion. So thankfully Tua will, at least we hope, will play in week 8 against the Cardinals. Let's talk about one more backfield here, and that is the one in Pittsburgh. And Najee Harris has now had back-to-back amazing games, which we know has been hard for him to find in the last couple of years, really since his rookie campaign where he's been consistent. So, Robert, when you look at Najee, Russell Wilson again made the offense look a little bit better, a little bit more complete. Jalen Warren also looked good, so he's going to be a factor moving forward. So how do you view Najee Harris for the rest of the season, assuming Russell Wilson's the starter? Is Najee Harris now back in the good graces of fantasy managers?
Yeah, I think I think Najee Harris is a RB2, maybe low-end RB2. You definitely have him on your roster. I've got him on mine in the league. And listen, if other guys are hurt or if there's a bye week going on, boom, you feel confident about putting Najee Harris in your starting lineup. I think they're finding something within their run game. He's finding some comfortability within this run game, and Russell Wilson really opens some things up for these backs. I'm not as high on Jalen Warren right now. You're not really seeing the production from him consistently, but no doubt Najee Harris, RB2 in my opinion.
So a couple stats I saw earlier this week. Najee Harris has a 25% tackle avoid rate, by far the best mark of his career. So he's playing better than he ever has. But then the first start for Russell Wilson, Jacob Gibbs tweeted about this earlier this week. There was a huge drop in the number of stacked boxes that Najee Harris ran into this week, and a big increase in the number of light boxes that he ran into, because teams actually have to respect the pass when Russell Wilson's playing quarterback. So I do think Najee's an RB2. He's a great RB2 this week against the Giants. I'm interested in Warren as someone I want to roster. He was actually available in about half of leagues, because the other thing that changed in Russell Wilson's first start, first time all year that Jalen Warren played more than 50% of the snaps, actually had 14 touches. If he's getting 14 touches a week, I think he's going to be a good flex.
That's 35 touches for their backfield in a game where Russell Wilson also threw for 289 yards. So big improvement for the offense as a whole. And again, the matchup against the Giants, somewhat favorable. They've done a good job against running backs, so I guess, based on what the expectations are. But yes, I think if you have Najee on your team, certainly comes into that number 2 running back conversation. The only thing that was disappointing, and we talked about this with Russell Wilson starting, no targets, no catches for Najee. That's where Jalen Warren could make more of an impact. And to both of your points, I don't think we've seen the best of Jalen Warren because of that knee injury. So he's now 2 games removed from missing 2 games with that knee injury. Hopefully the best of Jalen Warren is still to come. Before we take a break, let's take one of your questions. Again, use the hashtag AskFFT so we know you're looking for us. I have Nick Chubb in my reserves. Do I drop Ramondre Stevenson or Travis Etienne to bring him into my active squad? So, Robert, what do you think about Nick Chubb and his return? Getting a touchdown against against the Bengals last week, losing the quarterback. Offensive line played a little bit better. Would you start Chubb over Stevenson or over ETN, assuming ETN plays?
Now, Nick Chubb wasn't quite the RB1 that I expected. Okay, I'll admit that. But he did get into the end zone, and he was productive from a fantasy standpoint. If anybody, but this is tough because I like both Stevenson and ETN. I think I'd start him. I'd probably drop Stevenson no, actually ETN. I'd drop ETN in this one to put Nick Chubb in the starting lineup.
I think this is an absolute nightmare decision. I think if ETN's not healthy enough to play, then that makes it the easiest.
Yeah.
But I think if I was ranking these guys rest of season, it would probably be Chubb and then Stevenson and then ETN. So I think I'd have to agree.
It's not an easy matchup for Chubb taking on Baltimore. It's not an easy matchup for Stevenson taking on the Jets, and ETN against a Packers team that's done well against the run. I would probably just hope, like you said, Heath, that we get another week of ETN off and you just start Stevenson and Chubb. Hopefully Chubb finds the end zone, Stevenson gets involved in the passing game, and your fantasy team works out well. But this trio of running backs isn't exactly elite, so hopefully these guys start to play a little bit better as the season moves on.